On a cold January day in 1781, the Continental Army under Daniel Morgan had their backs against the Broad River, and their front facing a British contingent led by Banastre Tarleton. Morgan was not backed into a corner, though. He had laid out this plan beforehand, and intended to use the Redcoats' own confidence against them. After a stalemate and a loss at Saratoga, the Redcoats turned their attention toward the south. They captured Charleston and hoped to gain support from the Loyalists there. The Americans had suffered defeats at the Waxhaws and Camden. The British took their victories in stride and pressed on into the South Carolina Backcountry. Cornwallis took command of the operations in the south in mid-1780, and over the winter began arraying his army throughout the region in an attempt to stamp out any colonial resistance. The British commander was one of the best British field officers in North America. He had fought in the New York campaign and the battles of Brandywine and Monmouth. However, in 1778 his wife became ill, and he returned to England to be with her. When she passed, he once again returned to North America to aid the British in the American Revolution. But this time he was sent to the south, and would take command of the British forces there. American General Nathaniel Greene, who had served under Washington in the northern campaigns, was placed in command of the Continental Army in the south. Greene was a former Quaker who had been ejected out of the faith when he enlisted in the army. His experience in running his own ironworks made him a great candidate for being a quartermaster in the army. He sought to apply his skills at supplying the army in the south. He knew that food and supplies could make or break an army, and worked diligently to supply his troops in order to keep them together. After the Battle of Camden, American forces regrouped in North Carolina, and Cornwallis wasted no time in pushing into the Tar Heel state. He occupied Charlotte and used Lieutenant Colonel Patrick Ferguson's force to the west to screen the main army's movements and put down any resistance in the backcountry. Cornwallis planned to move on the vital city of Salisbury, North Carolina. That city possessed manufacturers who made supplies to be sent to the Continental Army. However, Ferguson's force was confronted by the over-the-mountain men at Kings Mountain and soundly defeated. With his flank compromised, Cornwallis moved his army south to Winnsboro. He sent one of his subordinates, 26-year-old Banastre Tarleton, with a contingent to the west along the Broad River. Tarleton had studied to be a lawyer at Oxford, but after the death of his father became a gambler and left college. His family purchased a commission in the British Army for him, and as the Revolution erupted, he took part in many of the engagements and campaigns throughout the war. But by 1780, the war brought him to Cornwallis's army in South Carolina. Greene knew having his force concentrated in one location threatened the resources and forage available in that one area, and smallpox had broken out in camp. So he divided his forces similar to Cornwallis and sent a contingent of troops under Daniel Morgan further to the west to keep an eye on Tarleton, but also to make sure his troops had food. Morgan is one of the most colorful characters in the American Revolution. He was plainly dressed, usually depicted in his hunting frock, indicative of the long hunters of the backcountry. He was a veteran of the French and Indian War. In that conflict, he was wounded by a ball that entered the back of his neck, taking out his left rear teeth and exiting through the upper left side of his lip. His time as a wagoner in Braddock's army of that war resulted in him allegedly getting 400 lashes for striking a British officer. However, as the story goes, the man whipping him lost count and only gave him 399 lashes, leaving Morgan to claim, "I am still their creditor to the amount of 1 lash." When Tarleton secured 96, he did as he was ordered and turned his attention toward Morgan. He advanced on the Americans, but the Continentals had the dragoon leader well scouted. As Tarleton's troops marched against him, Morgan began pulling his troops back, staying miles ahead of the British. This was not out of cowardice. He was forming his army. He spread his men out to ensure they could find forage, and he also made the call for all available militia to join him. He needed this delaying action in order to get his command up to full strength. He pulled back to the Broad River with his army and awaited the pursuing British. American scouts and militia who kept an eye on Tarleton did not merely watch his movements and report them, but cut down trees to slow down the British artillery and wagons. They set fire to brush in the roads and roadsides, hoping to delay the Redcoats as much as possible and hopefully make them exhausted before they ever reached the battlefield. Morgan had chosen his field of battle, making his stand in an open area surrounded by trees that was used as cow pens. Farmers and people raised livestock in the mountains would drive through cattle out of the mountains and down toward the Piedmont region and onto the coast to be sold. Along the way, cow pens were set up for grazing and a place to rest on their journey. Cattle would also be sold at the cow pens to someone who would take them the rest of the way to the market. Because animals had foraged the landscape, there was no undergrowth, and the open area had slight rises that Morgan intended to use in order to protect his men in battle. The night before the engagement, he went around to his men explaining what was going to happen the next day. A militiaman named Thomas Young recounted the scene. It was upon this occasion I was more perfectly convinced of General Morgan's qualifications to command militia than I had ever before seen. He went among the volunteers, helped them fix their swords, joked with them about their sweethearts, told them to keep in good spirits, and the day would be ours. And long after I laid down, he was going about among the soldiers encouraging them, and telling them that the old wagoner would crack his whip over Tarleton in the morning as sure as they lived. Just hold up your heads, boys, 3 fires, he would say, and you are free. And then when you return to your homes, how the old folks will bless you, and the girls will kiss you for your gallant conduct. I don't believe he slept a wink that night. The next morning before dawn, with temperatures below freezing, Morgan arrayed his men in 3 battle lines. A skirmish line of sharpshooters from Georgia, North Carolina, and South Carolina were about 150 yards in front of the militia line, commanded by Andrew Pickens. The militia line consisted of men from the surrounding states and Virginia. Howard's Continentals occupied the 3rd line, the main opposition to the British. William Washington's dragoons were in reserve. Tarleton's men got little sleep through the night, and were winded by the time he arrayed them in the cow pens from left to right. Legion dragoons, 7th Fusiliers, 2 3-pound artillery pieces, Legion infantry, light infantry, and the 17th Dragoons. The 71st Highlanders and a unit of cavalry stayed in reserve. Tarleton could not see the Continentals in the early morning hours, plus their position behind a low rolling hill obscured his vision more. Morgan hoped to take the British by surprise by having such a strong main line hidden. As the British were getting into line, Tarleton sent his dragoons to attack, but also to find out where the American battle lines were. The dragoons proceeded to ride, feeling out the skirmish line, but failed to dislodge them. They soon returned to the left of the British line. This brief scrape allowed Tarleton's men to form, and now his men were ready to advance. Aside from a few unordered shots, the British did not order a volley, instead fixed bayonets, and moved towards the skirmishers. The skirmishers picked off officers and harassed the advancing line. Once the redcoats got close to the skirmishers, they fell back per Morgan's order and fell in line on the flanks of the militia, still taking aim and firing at the British. Morgan was walking up and down the militia line, cracking jokes with his men and encouraging them. He wanted to make them feel comfortable in the situation and not let the fear of the advancing enemy startle them. The British line buckled as it advanced due to the 7th's halting to fire without orders. This meant that they had to play a game of catch-up before they reached the militia line. The militia encountered the enemy units at different times because of this delay. The 3 shots that Morgan insisted on was not completely possible. However, the fire that the militia did direct toward the enemy was devastating, with many British units taking somewhere around 50% casualties against the militia. Many of the units got off 1 shot before the British charged, sending the 2nd line along with the skirmishers scurrying behind the main line. To Tarleton, this looked as though the militia were showing their weaknesses, like they had at Camden. This only gave the British more confidence as they could defeat the Americans. The militia formed up behind the American left, but as the 2 main lines collided, the 7th Dragoons made a mad dash for the American left, and reforming militiamen. The militia retreated to the safety of a slight hill and delivered a devastating fire into the pursuing cavalry. Just then, Washington's dragoons smashed into the 17th and sent them scrambling for the British line. With the British mounted forces pushed back, some of the reformed militia took up positions on the wings while other militia sought to reform. It was at this time that the skirmishers who had taken up a position on the American right flank became compromised. Tarleton had given the 71st Highlanders the order of no quarter the night before, ordered them to attack the skirmishers on their left. The skirmishers quickly fell back to the safety of the Continental line. The men of Scotland then turned their attention towards the American Continental line, seeing that he could be flanked. Howard ordered his men to pull back to refuse the line, but a miscommunication occurred, and the entire colonial line thought the order was to withdraw. This prompted the British to launch an assault, but Morgan was able to get control of his men and ordered them to halt. As the British got drawn into the indented line, the Americans advanced, along with Washington's dragoons attacking on the American right flank. A double envelopment had been performed. British soldiers surrendered in mass or ran for any safe ground. This would be a devastating battle for the British. Now they would go on to fight at the Battle of Gifford Courthouse, where they would win a Pyrrhic victory that would force Cornwallis to move towards Yorktown and his eventual surrender. Thank you all so much for watching. Please share this video to get word out about the channel, and watch for a Thanksgiving themed video that drops on Thanksgiving morning. Have a great Turkey Day, and I'll see you next time.